I have been covering the issue of alcohol and public health alcohol policy on Near FM since 2015, and today marks the 50th radio interview and podcast I have done in the area. My first interview in the area was with a gentleman, Conor Cullen from Alcohol Action Ireland, and my 50th interview today is also with Alcohol Action Ireland, with Sheila Gilheany, the CEO of the organisation, and I've interviewed Sheila many times before. Sheila, welcome back to Near FM.
Oh, thanks very much for having me on, Darren. I really appreciate it.
Okay, Sheila, we're doing this interview today to mostly talk about the sale of alcohol bill. Can you start off, Sheila, by telling our listeners, for those who don't know, about the history of this legislation and what is planned or proposed by the government?
Sure. So back in October 2022, the government published what they call a general scheme of the sale of alcohol bill. And there are a number of proposals within that. Now, the government has described this as being legislation to pull together a whole rake of different licensing laws, and some of which are quite archaic. We would understand that. However, within the legislation, some of the proposals that are there include quite significant extensions to our licensing hours. So, for example, pubs, bars, restaurants, which now at the moment would close at 11:30, would stay open to 12:30. There would also be a facilitation of late night opening of bars to 2:30 a.m. and nightclubs could stay open to 6 a.m. That's one element of the legislation, but there's also other things like increasing the number of venues where alcohol can be sold by, for example, introducing a new type of license called a cultural amenity license, which really means that any place that can call itself a cultural amenity, whether that's a cinema, whether it's a sports club, whether it's a children's camp, for example, actually could conceivably say this is a cultural activity and we would like to have a license for it. So there's a number of measures like that which really would concern us, because we're very aware that if you increase the availability of alcohol, either through extending licensing hours or increasing the number of venues where it can be served, you will increase the level of alcohol that is consumed. Now, we already have a problem in Ireland where we are drinking at a high level. We're drinking well above what we call low-risk drinking guidelines, and we know that we have a problem. We can see it, we can measure it in all sorts of ways. Most startling and most awful and painful of all, I would say, is that 4 people would die every single day from alcohol. But we also have pressures on our hospital services. Something like about 1,500 beds are used every night in hospitals in relation to alcohol. And we have severe pressures on our Gardaí, for example, in being able to deal with the fallout, from incidents that arise from alcohol. So with all of this in mind, concerned about the sale of alcohol bill. Where it's at the moment is that the government has actually said that they're going to split the bill in two, because it is a long and complicated bill, and they're going to advance, they say immediately, they've actually said that in the programme for government in this session in spring 2024, they'll bring forward a subsection of it that they're calling an intoxicating liquor bill, which will deal specifically with the extension of trading hours, as I've just been talking about there.
I believe I was telling my friend yesterday about our interview today, and he reminded me, I'd forgotten this, but during the Celtic Tiger, I believe the hours were extended as well, weren't they?
I have to say there has been different changes at different times, but what we're dealing with at the moment is that we know that there are really quite close links with the current levels of licensing hours. So just to give you a couple of examples of where our concerns would be lying, we would know from international evidence that for every 1 hour extension of trading hours, you're likely to see a 17% increase in alcohol-related crime, a 30% increase in traffic collisions in rural areas, and a 34% increase in alcohol-related injuries that would require hospital treatment. So, with evidence like that, we would be saying there's a really clear need here for a health impact assessment of the proposals before we go any further. And that's actually something that was recommended by the Oireachtas Justice Committee, who did what they call pre-legislative scrutiny of the sale of alcohol bill, and they said that this was a really important thing to do. And not only that, they also pointed to the fact that we have other legislation, the Public Health Alcohol Act, which was passed in 2018, that still hasn't been fully implemented. Now, we're actually pointing to, what we would call a policy incoherence, where you have one arm of the government through the Department of Health, which is so what I'm pointing to is this policy incoherence across government, where you have one section through the Department of Health, which is actually seeking to reduce our alcohol use through controls on pricing and advertising. That would be through the Public Health Alcohol Act, but which haven't been fully implemented yet. There's actually very important elements of that, including content, restrictions on the content of alcohol ads that hasn't yet actually been commenced. And then on the other hand, we have the Department of Justice through Minister Helen McEntee, who's actually seeking to increase alcohol availability, and they're rushing to do this. You can see how they're really trying to push this through right now at the moment, and it seems utterly incoherent, absolutely incoherent.
Yeah, I personally think that the plans by government go way too far. But personally, on Friday and Saturday nights, I wouldn't mind. Even though I don't drink alcohol and I extremely rarely go to the pubs, I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't personally mind if the pubs are open for another hour or two. But would you have a problem, Sheila, with pubs being able to open just for an extra hour or two on a Friday or Saturday night?
Well, we do, because again, if you were to look at, what are the consequences of doing that? So right now, we know that at weekends in particular, the pressure on EDs is very considerable. 30% of admissions to our emergency departments are as a result of alcohol. Now, if we were to increase that, by the levels that we have seen of what happens in other countries, how would our EDs actually cope? How do we expect, our paramedics, our nursing staff, our medical staff, cope with that increased demand? So what I'm saying is that at the very least, we do need to be measuring how much we can expect. And as I say, we know from other countries that even a 1 hour extension is likely to lead to a 34% increase in alcohol related injuries requiring hospital treatment. So if we're going to add that 34% increase, well, what does that mean in terms of how many additional staff would we actually need to have to be able to cope with it?
Okay.
And where and who is going to pay for that staff? Okay. And will, in fact, it actually be paid for? So these are all the concerns. These are, in fact, no, I would say these are just some of the concerns. There's actually quite a few others that we would have as well.
I know that in more recent years, or maybe decades, pub culture is not central to a lot of people in Ireland because a lot of people in Ireland don't drink, including myself. But it strikes me that a lot of people will hear the argument yourselves and Alcohol Action Ireland and others are making on this, that is to be against any kind of liberalisation of the licensing laws as being extremely restrictive. Would you agree, Sheila, that if everyone in Ireland knew what was planned with the sale of alcohol bill, that the argument yourselves and Alcohol Action Ireland and others have on it would be extremely unpopular to a lot of people and maybe most people?
Well, we actually know from polling data that about half of the population, more than half of the population, is opposed to this. So that's the first thing. We would also say that we can see from that polling data that considerable numbers of people are very concerned about specific aspects of the bill in terms of potential problems that would arise from violence. So just to give you a few figures, from that, 67% of the public are concerned about the potential impact on public services. And as I just mentioned there, less than half of people polled, 48%, were in favour of the bill's proposals. So there isn't necessarily widespread support at all for this bill. What there is is massive lobbying from the alcohol industry to have this type of extension. Now, we did we had a look at the lobbying returns to the lobbying register, and in the past year we saw that 8 representatives of the alcohol industry would have had meetings with the Minister for Justice or her senior officials in the Department of Justice. Now, that compares with just 1 meeting with public health advocates, and that would be ourselves. So you can see that really there is a very clear line, I would say, where the industry have very, very easy access to the government on this issue, and certainly the government are listening to that, but they're not, and they need to actually look and see, well, what and how should we be representing public interest in this way, not just vested interest.
Okay, Sheila, I've asked you this question on you and your colleagues in Alcohol Action Ireland this question many times over the last 9 years, but is there any more news or update with the implementation of the Public Health Alcohol Act?
So the most recent thing that has come about is that the section relating to the broadcast watershed for alcohol advertisements has finally been commenced. So from January next year, so that's January 2025, there will be a broadcast watershed so that you won't see alcohol ads on TV before 9 p.m. and also restriction on radio advertising as well. But that's very welcome, no doubt about that. But we really would be saying, why are we waiting another year, for this? It was passed in 2018. Why is it taken to this length of time to actually get it commenced? And why is it taking another year for it to be actually implemented? And I think I'll just answer that question is because of the influence of this industry and their marketeers on government thinking.